Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I'm delighted to welcome John Hall from Tampa, Florida, here to talk about his framework around managing stress, building resiliency, and if you're often concerned about chronic stress and burnout or lack of work life balance, how to maintain, build resiliency. John's the man. I'm really happy to have him. He's got a really interesting framework, the BPM, and I'm happy to pick his brain. So, John, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. So glad to be here.
Yeah, I love how we talk backstage and briefly introduce yourself and how you help clients and what clients come to you most often for.
Yeah, and it was an interesting journey to get to this point as well because I was in the tech space for 30 years, right? 25 years with JP Morgan Chase. So it was a completely different shift to get into this space, but it had such parallels. It was based so much on my own journey and learning how to adapt to this, learning how to handle all of this that really drove to me now being able to share this with clients.
Yeah. Yeah. And so talk about the number one thing that clients come to you for help with or what they're struggling with and how you help them.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things that people come to me for is they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling stressed out or burnt out. Not that any of us have ever faced that before, right? But they're feeling that just basically the circumstances are too much for them. I work with people that might have imposter syndrome. They've stepped into a bigger role and now they're feeling stressed out because they feel like they don't belong. So really what I've done is built the BPM framework to assist them with being able to handle more chaos, more adversity, more uncertainty in their life. Because one of the things I always share is that successful people don't have less stress, they have better stress management techniques.
Mhm. Yeah, really interesting. And talk about so one thing we talk about is just when these situations arise, what is like the first thing that you recommend in your BPM framework for clients to handle?
Yeah, one of the biggest concepts that I really try to share with everybody is right. First off, we like to think that we are very logical beings who sometimes get emotional. And the reality is that we're very emotional beings that sometimes are logical, right? That's the reality of how we're wired. And so our emotions run the show most of the time, right? We have there's some great books and concepts around this, but we have a two-tier thinking system. We have a level one that's just the default. That's the mode we're in most of the time, right? So if you ever wind up at a destination that you drive to all the time and you're like, man, I don't remember the drive. I don't remember how I got here. But you obviously drove and you made all these little corrections and accelerated and brake. That's your system one. That's this level one that's just default processing. And then the level two is where we get into the more higher effort consciousness or awareness and processing. But that takes a lot of effort for us to be there. And so a lot of times when we're at level one, our biases or emotions, if we're not aware of this stuff, it'll just drive us to a default pattern and a default reaction when we get into a stressful situation. So that's number one, is understanding that concept and understanding how we are. The second part is understanding the physiology and the evolution behind it. If 10,000 years ago, if I was out in the woods and all of a sudden I got surrounded by a pack of wolves, and I'm not talking like coyotes, I'm talking like real wolves, if you've seen those before, right? Like they are big, and a wolf pack would be a frightening thing to be out in the woods and see by yourself. And so my body would have these reactions to that stress. My heart rate would go up, my vision would narrow, my brain would, there's specific things that happen in my brain. So the blood flow to this prefrontal cortex shuts down, which is my executive decision making. And my back here, my amygdala will take over, it'll hijack the brain, which again, I don't want to be thinking about the spiritual or psychological nature of the wolf attack. I want to be thinking like, how do I respond? How do I either run, fight, or get how do I get out of here? How do I protect myself?
Mhm.
So we built this evolutionary response to stress, which was perfect 10,000 years ago when we got into every now and then we get into a stressful situation. The problem is now someone tells us that a report is due, or a big client isn't going to be with us anymore, or our mother-in-law is moving in for 6 months, and we trigger the exact same stress response, right, as being surrounded by the pack of wolves. So understanding these two components, the emotional component and the physical component, I think is really key to start the discussion around stress.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, and a lot of 'cause for example, I was a surgeon in my past life, and a lot of them are just very hard charging, very aggressive. People from that kind of or lawyers that are very again very aggressive. How does breath physiology and mindset impact our decision making and performance?
Yeah, absolutely. So and I love again with your medical background, and you'll be keeping me honest on this as well, which is fantastic. But the biggest thing that we're recognizing is this is a physiological response. We've
Mm,
got our bodies reacting to stress, which is impacting our brain, which is impacted, right? The MRI scans they've shown
mhm,
if our heart rate goes over about 100 beats per minute in a stressful situation, like
mm,
literally they see the blood flow to this prefrontal cortex shut down. It
mm,
has less activity, less blood flow. So when we're in a stressful situation, the key is recognizing, like a lot of times we tell ourselves, calm down, right? How many times in the past I'd be like, John, calm down, get it together, let's focus, right? So we're trying to use our mind to undo this situation. And the problem is that it's like an 8-year-old girl telling an 800-pound gorilla to calm down, right? It's not that effective, right? This little part is not going to command the rest of our body the way that we want it to. So the first thing that I teach is, again, I use breath work 3 ways. I use it tactically. So we're going to talk about that. I use it strategically, which is where we build up our window of tolerance to handle more chaos and adversity. And then I was sharing, I use it like at an operating system level to change our beliefs. But when we look at it tactically, using the breath a certain way, and I'll share that in a moment.
mm,
But what that's going to do is that's going to signal the vagus nerve to the mind that we're in a place of safety and we're in a place of calm, right?
mm,
So the breath is the first part of the BPM framework. And I built it because I thought I like the heart rate going up, like beats per minute. And I built it as breath, physiology, mindset.
mhm,
So the breath is the number one thing. We're going to use the breath, again, signaling the vagus nerve to send the signal to the brain that we're safe, right? So that's number one.
mhm,
The physiology comes into play. So then we're going to make a physiology move, right? So again, we'll do a specific move, which is most often we're going to be opening up our chest because we tend to collapse in when we get into a place of stress, right? We tighten up the chest and we collapse in. So by reversing that, right, again, what we're doing is sending a signal from the body to the brain that we're safe. And again, there's science around this one as well. We often think of like our mind controls our body, right? We think very much as the somatic nervous system. I tell my hand to make a fist and it makes a fist. So my mind controls my body. But they did a study in the UK, and there's a number of studies around this. Amy Cuddy did a number of TEDx talks around this, if you're familiar with Amy Cuddy. But in the UK, they did one that was just fascinating to me. They took a group of clinically depressed patients. So these are people they've clinically been diagnosed with depression. And they had them stand in front of a mirror and force themselves to smile for 10 minutes. So they're just smiling, forcing that signal of smiling and looking at themselves smiling for 10 minutes. They found it was as effective as Prozac. So just think about that. Your body taking a certain physiology, in this case, smiling for 10 minutes, is as effective as a pharmaceutical in overcoming people, for people that have been diagnosed with clinical depression.
mm,
So our physiology is the next part. That's the P part of BPM. So we're using physiology again to send a message from the body via the vagus nerve to the brain that we're in a place of safety. And then the third part that we do is we do the mindset. So now what we've done is we freed this hijack of the amygdala. We've allowed blood flow. We've calmed down. Our heart rate has gone down. We've allowed blood flow to get restored to this prefrontal cortex and our executive decision making. And then we can start to look at a situation with mindset like what's possible, right? We just got the news that our client canceled. Okay, what can I possibly do? Right now, I can start looking at options, and I'm looking at them from a completely different place than before when my physiology was completely different.
mm. Interesting. And so my follow-up question is because I've been a lot of mainstream media, like the TV show Billions is talking about like Bobby Axelrod and he's like doing meditation and
Yeah.
there's like Ray Dalio, Olympic athletes. Why aren't more professionals tapping into these proven methods to optimize their own success?
They are, is what they're doing, right? So, one of the things, there's a broad space of mindfulness. Meditation is part of that.
Mm,
Breath work is also a part of it. One thing that really fooled me when I started out, I know it fools a lot of other people, is, I went in thinking that meditation was like going to be, okay, I'm just going to clear my mind and no thoughts are going to be in it. And it's going to be perfect, right? That's how I'm going to meditate. And if you've never meditated before, like that is the hardest. That is like the Everest. That is like waking up one morning and going, I'm going to scale Everest, right? That is the absolute hardest thing to do, is to completely clear your mind. So, what meditation really is you're focusing your thoughts. You're learning to bring control and focus over your thoughts.
mm,
So, rather than just any random thought running around your mind, and you're so caught up in your thoughts that you think that you actually are the thoughts in your head,
mm,
what you're doing with mindfulness practice and with what I love about breath work is you're bringing all your focus with breath work to the breath.
mhm,
So now you're bringing all your focus to the breath. You're getting your mind to focus on the breath, which is a form of meditation. But I'm also making these physiological changes through my breath, right? To my blood chemistry, to the signal to my autonomic nervous system, the signal through my vagus nerve. So all of this is like just stacking the best things we can against the same goal, which allows us to achieve the same things. And so breath work is absolutely, it's used by they know this and they use this breath certain way in these same techniques.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. And then the other question I have is this kind of fast paced environment, medicine, law, finance, business, entrepreneurship, technology. You have to make decisions under pressure. But then how does this different? Because you get involved, you get all these emotions thrown at you, anxiety, urgency, lives are on the line, money's on the line, careers are on the line. And how do you maintain this emotional? What techniques do you recommend to keep emotionally distant and keep clear in mind? People are yelling at you. How do you handle all that?
Yeah, so this is perfect because it's such a segue into the strategic piece, right? So tactically, we know now we understand a bit about how to regain control in a given situation. But you're right, like you're going through your day and you're just constantly getting buffeted by this stuff, and your emotions can come up. And I'm going to make a small caveat, which is not emotional distance, but it's emotional awareness, right?
Mm,
So I think of my emotions to me are like the little lights on the dashboard that are indicating something's off or I need to pay attention to it. But the difference is that I have learned that initial wave of emotion will hit me. I've got maybe 15, 90 seconds of emotion that'll come over me at first, because that's how we're built. That's the physiology. But then what I can do is bring my awareness to, okay, I'm really feeling angry, or I'm really feeling like I want to run in this case, or I'm really feeling like I want to go drive forward and tackle somebody. I don't know what it is, but I've learned, and this is what I teach the clients, as we start to build that mindfulness, we build the awareness that we are not our emotion. And so by building the awareness that we're not our emotion, we can be aware of what the emotion is. And again, even dig deeper into it, because a lot of times I joke, women are so good at this, right? Like women, they grow up and they learn emotions a lot better than men. Like with men, I joke we have four emotions. So we're hungry, horny, punked, or pissed. Those are like the four emotions of men, right? And we got to bucket it down into one of those a lot of times. So we have to learn this emotional nuance of, okay, what exactly is going on? If I'm feeling like I'm really ticked off, I'm really angry, okay, learning to navigate that and go underneath that and get to the deeper emotions. So it's an emotional awareness,
mm,
and the awareness that you are not your emotions. And that allows you to start navigating things. And you find that it gets a lot cleaner, because the emotion comes through when you're like, this is really upsetting me. This is really offensive what this person is doing. But then once you label it and you tag it, you go, okay, now I can let that go through me, come back to center and go, what's my action plan from here? Right. So I'm not reacting like a knee jerk reaction. I'm reacting from a much higher place of, okay, this is really pissing me off, but I can see some options now that I've acknowledged that, and I understand the reason why this is doing it.
interesting. The other question I have is, a lot of, or how do the techniques differ from, are the techniques easier for people that are, for example, like I have friends and colleagues that are able to maintain emotional distance, whereas like more like highly sensitive people, they can get caught up in it, they can get emotional, and then you begin this downward spiral.
Yeah, it's no, this is a very accessible practice. I'll share a little bit. I've spoken on other podcasts. So if people are interested, there's some other podcasts around this. I had a very chaotic childhood and I became codependent as a result of the chaos in my childhood, which led me into an emotionally abusive marriage.
Mhm.
And so I have a lot of people who are codependent. We have a very highly attuned, we can be highly sensitive people because we're very attuned to the situation around us
Mm.
because that aligned with our survival in childhood. So part of this was me learning these techniques because it can be overwhelming at times to just have so much awareness of everything going on and you're feeling that so intensely and you're actually getting commingled with the other person's emotions and your interpretation to the emotion and childhood patterns that you've carried forward that are now making the emotion 100 times more intense than they should be.
Mm.
So that's again why I really love the breath work because it comes back to a very basic practice that lets you regain the tactical control. And as you do these a different style of breathing, you do that strategically, you're building out what we call our window of tolerance, which is our ability to handle adversity, chaos, uncertainty, right? And handle different emotions in this range without going into fight or flight or going into like shutdown, right? So you're avoiding those extremes of hyper or hypoarousal as you go through this.
Yeah. And which was really interesting because you alluded to shutting down. And what was interesting is that during residency, I worked with so many different attendings and different residents and just all these people dying in front of you, bleeding out in front of you, broken bones. And what was interesting is these things triggered certain physicians, and they basically shut down. They couldn't, like all this, it was just overwhelming. They just shut
Yeah.
down. And
Yeah.
then the top performers, they could take it even though they were triggered or whatever, they could manage to navigate. So what is the difference? What are they doing? How are they different?
It's a great scenario because I understand the scenario. I understand the parallels to the scenario that I've had clients in or I've had my own life in. Obviously, you have your own journey through that as a surgeon, and you're facing literally life or death circumstances, right? That you've got to not only execute on the plan, but you've got to adopt the plan based on what's happening or what you discover that could be, like you have time to react or oh my gosh, something like they're crashing, I imagine. You've got to react to that, right? Very suddenly.
Yeah.
So I and I understand also why you're using the term emotional distance because you're in that situation. To me, what I'm hearing you explain is a situation almost where like I can't process the emotion right now. I have to set it aside and focus on the task at hand. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
So what I would ask you is what happens afterwards when the adrenaline drops off and now you're like that event is replaying in your mind. Do you ever have the situation where afterwards you're almost going through like the review or the flashback or the after effect of
Mm.
that situation? Because I'd love to drill into that with you.
Mm. Yeah, what I noticed was that just the overwhelm and just people screaming and yelling at you, or just patients dying in front of you, or just the acuity of the situation and the just the people that would just get bogged down would get overwhelmed and then shut down, whereas the people that could function in this sort of environment, they were able to it almost seemed like they were just emotionally distant. They just basically shut that part off and just did the task, whatever
Right.
needed to save the patient. So what are they doing differently? How are they and like Navy SEALs, when they go through Hell Week, they're literally dying and then they got to function, and they no sleep, they're hungry, they're
Right.
tired.
Right.
What's going on?
So again, I think you've got two models in this space, right? But I think that there's a model of people that are disconnecting the emotions
Mm.
and they're going through it, right? So they're able to accomplish the task by disconnection of the emotion.
Mm.
But the challenge is that if you never pick that emotion back up, that stuff starts to get stuck and it starts to catch up with you, right?
Mm.
And that's where you see things coming out sideways because I'll share a story. I have a good friend of mine. He was a forensic psychologist. And so he was working on some really horrible cases like child abuse, like terrible cases in the legal system.
Mm,
And he became clinically depressed because of all this stuff, these emotions, like seeing the horrible side of humanity was taking such an impact on him.
mhm,
And he had to learn his own journey of how to go back into those emotions and release that to let it flow through him so it doesn't build up.
mm,
So I'll go back to that situation. I think you wind up with people that disconnect
mm,
and are able to pick that up later or are able or unable to pick it up later. And
mhm,
then that starts to lead to, depending on how much you're able to effectively process this after the fact,
mhm,
is depends on how much comes out sideways.
mhm,
And then I'll also say there's another class of people that do feel that emotion. They feel the fear. Like, you're in a situation that you're like, I had one recently. I had a hurricane come in. I had severe flooding. I had a basic plan. I'm a fifth generation Floridian. So hurricanes are like, yeah, okay, we have a basic plan, right? So I had a basic plan of what to do when with the hurricane came and it started flooding. I was caught totally off guard. All of a
mm,
sudden, my house, and I was very fortunate because it was raised. My house has 4 feet of water under it. It hadn't hit the main floor, but I'm literally like, I've got two dogs. I got a kayak that was starting to float away, pulled it on the main deck and go, okay, if I start flooding, I'll go to the second floor. And if the second floor floods, I'll put the dogs in the kayak and I'll swim them somewhere. Right? I don't know what I'm going to do. And the fear was just like, I'm sitting in the house in the middle of this hurricane. For some strange reason, I still had power and internet because it was buried and it hadn't shorted out. But I'm hearing waves and things in my crawl space thumping against the pillars, which was like, you're just like, okay, is the house going to collapse? Is the water going to continue to rise? That was a very stressful situation I was in. And I could feel the fear starting to rise because you start thinking, how am I going to rebuild? Am I going to live? Like, what is going to happen? And I remember taking this practice and doing what I teach. Surprising, I know, but I'm like, I'm going to just let this fear, I'm going to go into the fear. I'm going to let it go through me. I'm going to acknowledge the fear. And it felt like I did this. If you remember the old Nestea tea plunge commercials, I felt like I just did this back thing and I'm going right into this fear. I'm going to go right into it.
mm,
And it was about 15 seconds of the most intense fear I'd ever felt. And then all of a sudden, I felt like I popped out the other side and I was perfectly calm.
hmm,
And I did the breath. I've done a lot of work on the mindfulness. And all of a sudden, I came out and it's like I no longer had the fear because I felt it. I let it go through me. And all of a sudden, I'm at this place of, okay, I can think clearly. Let me think this through. Let me build a plan. And then at some point, I'm like, I got the plan. I'll sit down, relax. And if this happens, I do this. If this happens, I do this.
mm,
And so this is what I work with clients on. That was my own journey through it, just one example. But this is what I work on because if you're able to take that and get through that emotion really quickly, now it's not even something you have to process later on. Now it's not even something you've disconnected with. You've allowed that fear to wash through you and you're back to a place of groundedness. And that thing's no longer hanging out in your psyche, in your body, anywhere. And I found that is the class that really is just able to navigate through. And I would surmise that there is a small set of surgeons that actually are just able to do that and go through it more cleanly as a result.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. I think it's a skill because, for example, my brother, he's able to emotionally just shut off that part. And as a result, it's a little bit distant. He's able to handle the more tougher situations. What are the best questions you've discovered to immediately help someone shift their mindset, shift their state, physiology, or just help them in like when the shit is hitting the fan?
Yeah. And I'll add this because you were saying when you were talking about your brother, it reminded me, I think it was Winston Churchill. He said, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather action in spite of it.
Mm,
So again, it's not, oh, I don't feel the fear. It's no, I'm able to fear it and then feel the fear and then able to come up with an action.
mm,
So let's talk about a very practical thing that we can do. So we started a little bit with this evolutionary response, We started a little bit with understanding the emotion and the physiology of it. So here's what I'm going to ask everyone to do, and you can join along here. So if you just take your two hands and put one hand on your belly, like
Mhm.
right about the navel, and put one hand on your chest, and just paying attention to the hands and how they move, take a nice deep breath in and exhale out. And which hand moved more, your chest or your belly?
I would say yeah,
Chest. Okay.
yeah.
And that's very common because while we're born with belly breathing, we learn to breathe into our chest over time and we adapt that.
Mm,
But it has very different activation in our body when we breathe into our chest than our belly.
mm,
So now what I'm going to do is say, now put your hand on your chest and a hand on the belly.
mm,
You're going to just try to keep this chest hand stable and let the belly hand move. Nice deep breath in through your nose, same way, moving that belly hand. Exhale out through the mouth. And did you feel a difference between those two breaths?
mm. The second one was a little bit more relaxing, like you feel a little bit more at ease. So deeper relaxation.
Yeah. So what they found, what the science has found is when we do that deep diaphragmatic breathing, which is something that I also teach clients to just learn to do regularly, like that becomes your default breath rather than the chest breath.
Mm,
But that diaphragmatic breathing is signaling the vagus nerve a place of calm to the brain, a place of safety to the brain.
mm-hmm,
So let's do this one more time. So what we're going to do is, again, hand on the chest, hand on the belly.
mm-hmm,
We're going to close our eyes and we're going to take that breath in through the nose into the belly. So breathing in through the nose. Nice deep belly breath. Just pause for a moment. Now we're going to exhale slowly through the mouth at a longer count. Nice long exhale through the mouth. And how did that feel compared to all the other breaths?
Even you seems like it's a even deeper relaxation state. So,
Yeah. So what they found is when we breathe in through the nose, so say we do a 5 count into the nose to the belly, and then say a 7 count or longer exhalation through the mouth. Again, that's even a stronger signal from the vagus nerve to our brain. It's rebalancing out that autonomic nervous system. So it's bringing that parasympathetic up a little bit more and the sympathetic down a little bit more.
mm,
So that's where we start to feel, right? That's the breath. If again, doing that breath when
mhm,
you get into a place of stress is starting to signal to the brain to release that hijack and allow you to ground and center a bit more.
mm,
Then we're going to follow up on that. Again, doing the breath, but now what we're going to do is drop our shoulders, open our chest, right? We can do this by just even resting our hands on our lap, like on our upper thighs. And now we do it again. And again, what we're doing is our physiology. We open our chest when we're more safe and in more of a powerful situation. We close our chest when we're in danger
mm,
or we're in a more stressful situation. So again, we're using that physiology. So breath first, physiology next, BPM. So we're using that again to send signals to the brain to relax and calm down.
mm,
And then at that point, you should really feel calm and grounded and recentered. And at that point, you work on the mindset to go, okay, what's my mindset and what do I want it to be? But you've gotten the 800-pound gorilla to calm down. So the 8-year-old girl has a chance to work things a little differently, right? So we're just changing the sequence of things as we do this.
interesting. One final question before you can tell people to contact you. I know because you do workshops, and
Yeah.
so you mentioned people in like stressful or traumatic situations, and you talk about processing and release. What are your favorite techniques for helping people release those just negative events, emotions?
Yeah. So the biggest thing, and again, there's the technique that I do with clients, but I'll share it in a way that can be done by anybody practically. Cause, a lot of people say, great, I got to sit down and do an hour of breath work with you. And that's not going to be practical. So, the biggest thing that I encourage people to do is build a pause into their day.
Mm,
So by building these pause moments, because we live in a world of constant interruptions, constant distractions, right? This little distraction device is just always present. And they've shown even like when it's face up in a situation, like you put it on the dining table, right? And it's face up and an alert comes across and immediately your distraction jumps to it. So building these pauses, building these places of stillness and silence and quiet is really key to allowing this stuff to come up. Now, I love to incorporate breath work into it. There's a great technique, you can Google it, called box breathing. That's a fantastic technique that you can use as this strategic ability. I'll do breathwork sessions where we're getting into 30 minutes of breath work, and that lets us really rebalance the autonomic nervous system. And what'll happen is you'll find things start to bubble up at that point.
Mm,
And the key is when something starts to bubble up, like you're doing this pause and you're doing this breath and you're starting to relax and reset. And now what bubbles up is, oh my gosh, I remember, like for you, it might be, I remember that patient coding. And all of a sudden, like the stress that hit and the people screaming at me for a decision and direction of what we're going to do, like that might come up. So now you're gonna let those emotions that came in go through you,
mm,
and you're just going to let yourself feel the emotion rather than trying to bat it down or do anything about it. You're letting that emotion come up without letting the emotion overwhelm you. And you're breathing through it and letting that process through. And what happens is then you start finding like ideas, concepts. I could have done this differently. Maybe if I did this, what if we, you know what? I remember not feeling great about this up front at the start of the surgery prep. And sure enough, that bit of information I felt wasn't current came up and related to the situation, right? That's when we start getting these insights and awarenesses that we wouldn't get otherwise.
mm.
So building in those moments of stillness and pause, and sometimes people will just build it like right before bed. They'll take 15 minutes and journal about gratitude, but things will come up. That's so critical. And that's where I love using breath work as a way to guide people into that state, train their mind and body how to get into that state more easily. And when we do hour-long stuff, it's really cool because we start getting to what I call like the operating system and limiting beliefs and things that we've carried around. That's when we really can start shifting some stuff in the subconscious.
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah.
How can people find out more about you and learn from you and check out your work?
So johnhallcoaching.com, that's John with an H, johnhallcoaching.com, or you can search John Hall Breathwork. There's a lot of John Halls out there, but I'm the breathwork guy. John Hall Breathwork in Google, that's going to get you to my site.
Yeah, excellent. I really enjoyed this and a really fascinating discussion and really very important in today's time. So thanks so much for coming on and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for getting this message out to everyone.